This is Ross Coulthard, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy, and joining me from a dark room, I have Dan for a little breakdown. Dan, how are we?
The dark room is for ambience.
It is. And if you're on audio, it will mean nothing. So welcome. And if you're on video, welcome.
Just close your eyes. That's how dark the room is.
Pretty much it, yeah. If he leans back too far, he kind of disappears. Breakdown, Dan, with a lot of listener questions to get through for this one, which we'll touch on a few newsy points as well. But I think the big talking point is the trailer for James Fox's upcoming documentary. The program finally dropped the other day, so we're going to have a chat through some of the elements of that were interesting. What we can expect from that. Kind of your expectations, a few listener questions on that, and then get through a load more questions too. So thanks to everyone who sent stuff in. I had a few people email me to ask how they can submit questions. The easiest way is don't Instagram me, don't Patreon post it, don't DM me on X. Honestly, if you just email me, ufoUAPam@gmail.com, and just put listener question in the subject, it's the most incredibly easy way that I don't find your question 3 months later that you sent me back when you did. So yeah, thank you to everyone who sent stuff in, and please email if you want them read out. But there's loads to get through, Dan. But yeah, James Fox, the program coming soon, which will delight the Discord chat. For all those out there who enjoy a coming soon. Yep, there is a sooning, but I think it is pretty soon on the horizon. It's ready. There's no distributor yet. That's probably, I think, the best place to kick off for that chat. It's not got a Netflix or an Amazon Prime or an independent distribution. Those talks seem to be still ongoing from James's end. He's trying to keep people up to date as much as he can online, but right now it's a case that it might come out. I would love to see it, Dan, on a big streaming platform. One, James gets paid for that, which is great because he's been shafted so many times with other documentaries, hasn't he?
Yeah.
And he deserves it for the work he puts into these things. But also it gets a bigger and bigger audience as well. But yeah, no distributor yet. Thoughts?
Well, before I carry on, I just want to say heart goes out to people in North Carolina right now. If you're in Florida, batten those hatches and stay safe. We'll pop a link down below where people can donate to kind of help the rescue efforts and recovery efforts and things like that. But it's been really lovely seeing everybody bandy together and help each other. The internet brings out the worst in people. Disaster seems to bring out the best in people very often. So stay safe. You know, Micah Hanks, Nathan, he's been on a few times. A lot of friends of the show have been there. So yeah, my heart goes out to them, and just donate if you can. Every little helps. But yeah, I would love to see it on, like, imagine logging into Netflix and just seeing the big banner at the top there.
Yeah.
We always talk about Stephen Greer's work and how that's kind of had a few road bumps, but James Fox seems to keep the bar really high, especially, with his not the phenomenon. I was going to say last movie then, but his last movie was Moment of Contact, right? So yeah, it'd be wonderful to see his name up there and for it to reach as big an audience as possible. This is the point of the work he's doing, is to seemingly catch everyone up, bring everyone kind of on the same playing field, and just so they know what's going on. And yeah, there was quite a bit in the new trailer, right?
Yes. What were you expecting from the trailer before it came out?
I was expecting the smooth, deep tones of Pizza Coyote, which I got. I was happy to see that. But also, I expected to see a whole bunch of kind of new whistleblowers, which we didn't necessarily get. I'm sure we'll go into it in a second, like what we did see. But there were one or two, and I've always got to remember with these things that it's not for us, right? Like if you're following this every single day, every single week, you're going to know probably most of what's in this documentary. But the people that the phenomena really struck a chord with, the people that aren't in this every day, the casuals, so to speak, or the people that maybe saw Lou on The Daily Show and is like, what's next? I want to know more. Those people are going to see a lot of heavy hitters kind of saying some big statements.
So I wonder, and I've literally had to write this down so I don't forget, but I'll get to it now. There's no release date for it yet, and you mentioned whistleblowers And I think one of the things people have been hoping for or expecting is we're going to have this, landslide of whistleblowers coming out and speaking with James Fox. Excuse the little fly that's just gone across my
Fly, that's an
screen.
orb. It's gonna, in like a YouTube comment, you're gonna see it.
Oh, that'll
Orb
be on
attacking Andy.
Instagram with 500,000 views in an hour. But is there an element that anyone James does have who may be attached to the upcoming hearings in November, then James can't release his documentary till after those dates because reasons? Would that make sense that they might have said, I'll come on, but you can't have this? Or maybe given some of the connections he has to senators and congressmen and women, and maybe there's been an agreement that these people will speak to you, because I know like Tim Burchett and Luna and whatnot have said recently that they don't want to bring the witnesses out now and announce them.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
potentially scared. I think that's a perfectly sensible thing to do as well, by the way. There's no point in announcing a load of names ahead of time for people to get excited about or talk about, or, as much as that would be great for us, like, keep them till the hearing and they can come out and do their thing, and then whatever happens after happens. And we'll get to talk about the Jason Sands stuff and why that's probably relevant, but maybe something in the fact that there may be folks in the documentary that will testify, and it's best that they do that first.
Yeah, quite possibly a kind of gentleman's agreement. And to be honest, it's probably going to make James's film more impactful if people can watch the hearings and then, Google the name and up they pop in James's new film where they talk a little more extensively and openly. I know the guy I'm staying with now, he's not interested in the subject at all, but he watched those hearings and he knows Fravor and Graves. Worst time ever to forget the other person that was there. Who am I forgetting?
Grush,
the big one.
Wow.
Of course.
I thought you were joking. I was like, yeah,
happy Monday, everyone. Monday brain. And I've had my COVID booster today, so don't come at me. But yeah, he knows those names and they made a big impact. So it would make sense from a marketing perspective to maybe spin it off the back of those hearings there. So that James reaches, again, as many people as possible. Also, we saw last time, we've seen it a few times now, actually, where certain people have come forward, like Sarah Gam. I know Tim Gallaudet. Is that how we say it?
Just Tim Gallaudet, not Tim, but yeah.
Tim Gallaudet, where certain journalists have glommed on to certain facets of his life outside the UFO subject and attacked him over them and tried to kind of belittle the import that he brings to this, when really, it's kind of by the by. If you have these people in such powerful positions where they're commanding, whole fleets and things like that, I don't care if in your home life you go see a medium or something for personal reasons. It should still have the impact, and it's not fair to attack someone on that. Fair to bring it to light, I guess, but to attack someone, So I can see why those names are kind of being held back for now, and until they walk onto the floor.
Similar to Bob Lazar being a pimp is an issue for a lot of folks, Dan, but he could still have worked on an alien spacecraft.
Like me, put my hand up. Yep. Yeah, no, exactly. It just gives people an easy out. And I always say when I talk about this, that's my bias now. And I try and be aware of that, but I'm trying to balance it as I still receive more info and read more and hear more from Bob's side of the story. Whereas many people will just switch off and they wouldn't kind of carry on listening. So yeah, I can totally see why they would keep those names back.
It's funny you mentioned obviously Fravor and Graves. So you get Dave Fravor, Ryan Graves, the pilots who testified,
and Grush.
Alongside David Grush. Grush was the newer of the three at the time. And when I was speaking to Nick Gold last week, I don't know if you've bothered or had a chance to listen, Dan, but I mentioned regarding that hearing that Fravor and Graves, for me, could have not been there and it would have still had the same impact globally, because Grush made all the big statements and stuff, and Nick very fairly, and I retracted what I said, because Nick was like, no, you don't realize how important it was that they were there for the congressmen and women, the senators, the journalists, the folks in politics and the military who aren't into this subject, and what that meant, not even necessarily to the public who didn't know the story, but just for the kind of gravitas of their positions. And I was actually, I am speaking from a UAP geek, I think as we called it, point of view at the time, where we know that story, we know their stuff, so I'm just hearing them say the same things, but that's not for me. And I was like, yeah, do you know what? Totally fair, because that's very, very poignant. They were there, and it was like, just because I knew what was happening doesn't mean, you know, other people shouldn't hear that story, and it's not completely relevant. And that might be something to bring it back to the program. There will be things, like you say, within this, Dan, that we know, that the UFO community, depending on how well researched or how well informed you are or what you've heard, you will see bits of stuff that you know. I do get the feeling, and this is one of the questions that comes up in a little while from listeners, so we won't go too much into it, but there will be some new stuff in here for us. That's a definite on my part. But yeah, Leslie Kane talks about the hearings. That's one of the first thing. Grush's comments are going to be a big part of it. A lot of the representatives asking the questions to Grush, you know, did we have bodies? Did we have craft? That's all a big thing. And I think if you're a member of the public seeing and hearing that, that's going to prick your ears up, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. There's one, I rewatched the trailer just before we jumped on here, and there's one that just tickles me when, I can't remember who it is, maybe it's Nancy Mace, asks if we managed to get the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft, and just the repeat of the word pilot tickles me there, because you're piloting, that's a pilot. But one of the massive impacts for me right there, and I guess I can pull another little bit of news into it, was where AOC, Alexandra, I always mess her name up, Cortez. Ocasio-Cortez. Yeah, that's right. She asked Grush during the hearings about IRADs, IR&Ds. Basically, these are there are so many different acronyms in this. They're basically independent research and development programs. It's a way that the government can give money to research without being directly connected. So a little bit of plausible deniability, but also Grush directly said that this is what was being done to fund UAP programs, that funds were being misappropriated in that way.
And see, for an example there, from a complete layman like myself, I'm thinking then that a private contractor or a subset in the government could say, we think that the Chinese have this new uranium rod, that when it's heated a certain way allows them to propel drones, you know, an extra, you know, 150%, and we want to study this. And they can go, okay, so what we'll do is give this little funny named organization that money, and they go and study that, and the government don't have to say, yeah, we're studying Chinese advanced propulsion.
Yeah, exactly. That's precisely it. There's just a level of removed from it. And this past week or so, Douglas Dean Johnson, who I'm sure we'll talk about him in another kind of area today, he found that Battelle Memorial Institute, BMI as they're called, they were involved in UFO studies way back in the 50s, you know, before they even had floppy disks. It was when you had the punch cards and you put them in machines. They're kind of involved in the decades of study that this has been going on, and kind of people, you know, squint their eyes at them and wonder, what did you find out? What are you keeping from us? And Douglas Dean Johnson actually found out that they're currently lobbying against part of the legislation, the UAP legislation that's going through this year. Last year, something was passed that basically said you're not allowed to use funds for studying anything to do with UAP. That's expiring this year, so they need to renew it. And it seems that renewal is being lobbied against by a company that lobbies politicians on behalf of Battelle Memorial Institute. And just to speak to exactly what you were just saying a second ago about the rods, it seems to be they have an issue and want to add exceptions to the law for development of microelectronics and device cyber protection. So something there is kind of thought to maybe have a legacy from a downed UFO or something like that. Microelectronics obviously is a simple one. Device cyber protection. There's something interesting. I saw that someone dragged up that they were being funded for quantum computers and cyber. Was that you buzzing?
No, it was my phone, but thank you.
Oh, yeah. Excuse you. Yeah, so they're being funded for quantum computer systems, which is interesting because that's the frontier of computers right now. And Travis Taylor and Jay Stratton. Travis Taylor was the UAPTF chief scientist, Jay Stratton, was the guy that was running with UAPTF in the official manner and kind of making inroads into organizations and things like that, making them take it seriously. They've both been involved in a company called ID Quantique, which is to do with quantum stuffs. And I say stuffs because it's not really clear on their website. So it seems that there's a whole host of really interesting possible implications around this. And these companies all said, no, we're not studying this stuff. Grush is lying. And now they're lobbying against it, saying that what they're not studying is something they're concerned about not being able to study.
I think I've thrown the format out the window at this point. So
yeah, sorry, I like Inception that one in there.
no. Travis Taylor stuff. I saw a clip online earlier today where he's at one of these, I think like Phenomicon type conferences, whatever it is, and he's talking about alien species potentially using
cow blood.
Yeah, cow blood to propel.
I saw this,
and I was like,
have you seen Jules, where they use cat blood in the UFOs?
No.
It reminded me of that.
I'm just like, he's such an interesting character, isn't he? Because in so many ways, he literally is a character on the TV show. But he was also quite involved in a lot of stuff. And he also does have a pretty decorated CV. Yeah. So it's like, it's really easy to dismiss some of the things he says or the way he comes across as being, he's playing to the cameras. It's just sensational stuff for TV. But then other things point to the fact, no, this guy's really intelligent. And again, is it what we said though before about Lazar and just there are elements of his personality or his past life that play to that? You said Tim Gallaudet, and I'm not necessarily directly comparing these people, but there are just elements of personal and private lives that, or opinions that can throw off everything, and maybe that's a bad way to look at it, isn't it? Because that shouldn't be the case. So yeah, Travis Taylor, where are you at with Travis?
Interesting guy. I know he's written a whole bunch of sci-fi, and I'm big on kind of reading sci-fi or watching it because it just lets you play with what ifs and different ideas. And so I'm really curious what ifs Travis Taylor is playing within his sci-fi books. Because like you said, yeah, he's really decorated. This guy is really accomplished, and he's a really smart dude, and he's just really intelligent. So yeah, I'd love to have a beer with the guy and just shoot the shit, as it were, and just see where his mind goes, because these people don't always, saying for example, cow blood powers UFOs. That sounds silly. It sounds as silly as saying, there's a werewolf at the end of the garden. But there are ways of talking about these things. With the werewolf thing, if Com Callagher has said there seemed to be a bipedal canine at the end of my property, it's a different conversation, as opposed to a werewolf. It kind of comes with all this baggage. So yeah, we're kind of in this point right now where the woo stuff sounds a bit crazy. But yeah, as we found out, just because it's crazy, it doesn't mean it's not real. At some point, people thought black holes were crazy, and look at us now, where we're indirectly taking pictures of the things.
My head immediately goes to Chris Walken on Saturday Night Live, and instead of saying we need more cowbell, we need more cow blood.
What's your impression of Christopher Walken like?
That's on the Patreon feed for anyone on Twitter. Not today, not that one. You've heard you heard me doing a Commander Riker impression before we recorded, so.
Which was wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you. So speaking of wonderful, the Calvine photo gets a run out on the documentary as well early on. It wasn't a secret. James Fox was doing some boots on the ground work in Calvine. I imagine doing some filming, doing some recording of interviews last year at this point, I think it was now.
Yeah, that's right.
And are you expecting some more coming out from a Calvine point of view from James?
No, but only because I kind of, I speak to people that are still investigating it, and it's gone in certain directions where the stuff isn't going to be publicly talked about for real specific reasons, because it will literally endanger the investigation and possibly somebody. So they're not going to be pushing that much. But like we said, if we follow this, we know what the Calvine photo is. You say Calvine to a UFO birth, and instantly they know the picture you're talking about. Whereas if I said it to my mum, she'd be like, what? Whereas it is a bona fide picture of a UAP, whether it's man-made or whatever. We don't know what it is. We know that they had 5 or 6 pictures and that there would be movement because there were jets kind of going around it. We know the location that it was at. The witnesses seem to not want to talk to anybody, and have kind of disappeared into the wind. It's a really intriguing UFO story. And when that photo came out from, it was the RAF press officer, Craig Lindsay, who kept a copy, just inadvertently, he kept a copy while sending it to the MOD and newspapers and things like that. Oh crap, I forgot what I was saying. I just
Craig Lindsay sending the stuff to the MOD, the pictures to the MOD. There was 5 or 6 of them. But do you know what? It does.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say it's just really compelling, and the articles that came out said, best UFO picture ever. And yeah, it's an incredible one. It's probably clearer than the Nimitz video that we've got, but most people won't know about it. So to package it all in with this and to say, look, there's a there, to use that phrase, it's a really neat piece of the puzzle.
If you're doing a UFO documentary about crash retrieval programs or potential reasons for these being human or non-human objects, then you would have to throw that in there as well. Here's a picture that potentially shows a reverse engineered craft or a craft that was escorted or whatever, or top secret. Yeah. I think it just makes sense to have it there. So I'm not expecting much new on Calvine, but I think it just makes sense kind of having it. There's some interesting footage shown as part of it, just some little clips of kind of UFOs up close, so to speak. There's one, and I can't remember exactly what it is. If you hold the moment, Dan, I'm going to leave the audio here as I speak and just confirm that it is the so yeah, it's not that. At 50 seconds in, I thought it was the Chuck Clark footage that we hear so much about. Yeah, but it's not. And I just
elaborate on that a little bit, just in case someone that's listening doesn't know what the hell Chuck Clark footage is.
Chuck Clark footage, if you check out any of my or James Fox's interviews he's done where he talks about it, is a video that was sent to UFO researcher Chuck Clark back in the 90s, VHS tape of 2 guys who were on a bit of a road trip, just filming it on the camcorder, and just happened to, on that kind of, I don't think it was Route 66, but that type of long road, came across this craft that was literally above them. And apparently it's like incredibly compelling stuff where they literally duck under the seats, they're terrified. You see the light going over the top of the car. They kept filming. And yes, this, Dan. But yeah, so the footage is essentially meant to be all that kind of stuff you see in movies and TV shows of an almost abduction type scenario where a saucer is right over the top of a car and it fills the whole car with light. And that was what allegedly Logan Paul saw the tape.
And filmed it on a
body cam type thing. Yeah. So yeah, I thought it was that, but it's not. So that's the Chuck Clark footage, but it's not a part of the documentary.
That's a shame. That would be cool to be in there. One of the really cool bits of that footage was, I guess if you're on audio, you're not going to see me do it, but supposedly the saucer was kind of bobbing like this, as if it was on a wave, and you could see that movement in the light, the way the shadows were kind of falling. Little details like that for me make things compelling, as opposed to just I saw a saucer. It kind of feels, the texture feels right. There are stills of that footage out there, but they're bad quality, and I would love to see it one day. I really would.
Yeah, I think we will. But like you say, it's very degraded, but I still want to see it. It's right up there with anything that could be released that I would want to see.
It can't be worse than what we're used to, right?
No, absolutely not. Whistleblower with voice distortion, Dan. So we see a member of the military, I'm presuming, sitting with that classic camera shot behind, just the kind of side of the head, could be anyone type shot. And their voice is distorted and basically says the American people are being lied to. Great soundbite for a trailer. This is where I think probably a good time to talk about the whistleblower side of things and what are your expectations now. I think what it makes a lot of sense when Representative Tim Burchett says we're going to keep the names of whistleblowers back, or the people speaking at the hearings in November. It makes sense because once people saw Jason Sands go online and start talking and then people saw that he was part of this documentary with James Fox, a lot of folks were like, James has to remove him from the documentary, he has to take him out. If he's a big part of this, it's going to ruin the documentary. And that's just all opinion. So I can see why they would hold anybody back from an interview perspective that may be testifying. But what are your thoughts then on whistleblowers? Because that is likely to be a big part of what we're seeing.
Yeah, 100%. I expect there will be some more whistleblowers in there, but there were also a few familiar faces in this that were saying things we hadn't heard them say before. That, you know, in some people could make an argument that they were blowing the whistle. So, for example, we saw Hal Puthoff of, you know, To the Stars. He goes way back with the Stanford Research Institute and things like that. He literally says, I would go to jail to say the things that I've been exposed to in the program. Heavy implications there that he was part of the program, which he's never said before. So to me, he's kind of blowing the whistle on something there. That's
right.
really intriguing. Go on.
So he says, word for word, you are correct. I would go to jail to say things that I've been exposed to in the program. When I discussed that with Nick Gold, Nick was saying it could be like he's willing to go to jail. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's what he's saying. I think
it could be that, right?
Yeah, but it's not. It's 100%. It's 99% not, right? It's like you say. I think it's that if I said what I know or what I've been exposed to, I would go to jail because it would be treason or whatever that may be. Okay, that's almost definitely what he's saying, but it's a very powerful line, and I'm guessing there's context before and after what he said as well.
No doubt, yeah.
That kind of expands it out a little bit. But Hal Puthoff being part of that, he is one of those guys that he's such an enigmatic name in the topic that he's sort of out of reach of everything. But the people that do most of the talking, there are a lot of folks I know like this, but also many folk don't like it, how connected he is to so many different aspects of the UFO topic. I've got no issue with that, but I could see why some folks would go, Puthoff again. And where other folks are like, Puthoff again. So that means something. Yeah.
And if it turned out that he was part of the program and he's one guy out there that's talking to people about this, then it kind of gives a reason as to why he's connected to all these different people, because he's talking, but behind closed doors. You know, he's talking to people who maybe have similar clearances or have been read on and given the right tickets, as Chris Mellon says. But we also get, as well as, you know, Jason Sands and the guy with the voice changer, we also get someone that we haven't seen kind of talk outwardly too much about it. Senator Kirk McConnell, who he was has, I'm just going to do a little biography thing, 37 years experience in national security initiatives and quantum computing. There's quantum computing again. He is a professional staff member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, the House Intelligence Committee, and the Select Committee on U.S. National Security and Military and Commercial Concerns with the People's Republic of China. So this is a guy that's been, for the past few years, in all the meetings as these witnesses were coming forward. You know, we've been told that the Senate has been talking to all the, you know, the 40-odd witnesses that Grush has kind of put forward. This is a guy that would have been in the room with all of those conversations, or so you would think from you know, his CV there. And he's there basically saying, you know, he's asked, so you're telling me people have come forward claiming firsthand knowledge of craft of non-human origin. And he says, and I'm not going to quote, I'm just going to paraphrase, that he absolutely has firsthand witnesses that are asserting that there haven't only been crashes, but also crash retrievals. Again, it's kind of a he said, she said thing, but like I said, this is a guy that's been in the room to hear these conversations. So there's weight that comes with that. And now I think, how many people on those committees now we heard say there's something to this. This isn't just hot air. And we still have people kind of trying to convince others that there's nothing to this this whole conversation. These are the right people to be listening to. These are the people with the tickets, the keys to the rooms, the ones that have been in the meetings. And it was really nice to see him in this trailer. I want to hear more from him.
Yeah, James Fox does clear up regarding Jason Sands. He was on American Alchemy with Jesse Michaels. It's like a 3-hour conversation. He does say that regarding James Sands' account, he chose to report on it and keep it in the documentary but he can't prove it happened. So I think that's important. And fair play to James to say, I can't prove this happened, but the report's there, and he is who he says he is. So I'm reporting the testimony, and
Sure.
that's totally fair. There are so many ways that the David Grush situation could have been handled badly when he first came out, that people would have probably downplayed the whole David Grush scenario that eventually did happen. And we said,
and just to jump in there, I remember when Grush did come out, a journalist tried to attack him, a journalist from The Intercept, Ken Klippenstein, and he was directed to a bunch of medical records that suggested Grush has PTSD, which Grush openly spoke about when he came out, but it was kind of played up as an attack. And Ken Klippenstein was recently kicked off of Twitter or X for leaking some information that he shouldn't have, that had JD Vance's home address and things like that in it. Sure, you can look up those addresses, but that's not okay. You're doxing the people. So yeah, real interesting. Clearly has connections to get documents that he shouldn't be getting. Sorry to interrupt there.
No, that's all right. And ultimately, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with the trailer. I'm looking forward to it. Was there anything else in there that you wanted to touch on?
What did you think of the appearance? I was surprised to see Gary McKinnon in there, just because that's like very 90s. It feels like a different caliber of conversation.
I suppose it's still an example of a whistleblower. Like like here's, and what he said was pretty spectacular at the time. Gary McKinnon, folks who basically hacked NASA's systems and came out and said he saw proof of alien life and extraterrestrial civilizations and all this kind of stuff stored on NASA's systems in various places. That's essentially it, isn't it, Dan? Like,
I think there was one particular file. He just to expand on the hacking thing, someone had left a computer connected to a network. It wasn't password protected, and he remote desktoped into it. So in the 90s, that would have been difficult to do. There weren't programs to do it as simply as there is today, where you bring your iPhone to your Mac and you can jump across those.
Is that screens. Like Jurassic Park when the girl's like a hacker and she's like, open main grid, open main gate, open this, and it's like, oh my god, you're a hacker, and it's like she's just
exactly open, exactly. Yeah. So to someone that knows that stuff, it would have been that's not hacking, but he got into a system he wasn't meant to get into, and he saw a picture that didn't fully load. He was kicked off before it fully loaded, but it was a ship above the Earth that was on the desktop. I've heard that argued as maybe it was a honeypot, maybe it's just something that's there because that if someone hacks it and finds that, they're not going to keep their mouth shut about it, so they kind of flag themselves up for security review. But yeah, he never took a screenshot. I guess computers were slower, and his jaw was probably on the floor kind of as it loaded.
We all remember the 90s and try to download pictures of anything. Bit at a time as it kind of went along. So yeah, it was again, Calvine, Gary McKinnon, I think Bob Lazar would have to be included within it. Not maybe new stuff, but I'm guessing you have to bring up that story, because if you are telling the story of UFO crash retrievals and the programs around back engineering them, whatever that's going to entail, those are all main elements of the story that have to be told. And I think the way James will present those types of things will be fair. It won't be Bob Lazar done this, and it won't be Gary McKinnon done this. It's like, here are stories that have been a big part of this lore, and it's up to the viewer watching it to kind of make up their mind how much to buy into those elements of it, which is always the way you should do those things, in my opinion. So
yeah, for sure. And to see that picture painted, that with this smoke, this fire, usually there's just a lot of smoke in this instance. To see all that put together with a question mark over it, and then to hear Colonel Carl Nell from the SALT conference, that clip, non-human intelligence exists, very pointed, very straight-faced, again, super qualified guy. That's going to be impactful, especially if you haven't been in this day to day. You're going to be like, what's going on? Kind of similar to people seeing Lou on the Daily Show.
Yeah. But generally looking forward to the documentary, Dan?
Very much so. I'll be watching it the first moment that I possibly can. Love James's work, and yeah, he deserves major props, and I really hope they get it on a good network, just because, especially because he was screwed over with the previous distribution companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I've said to him, like, for the month it comes out, I'm happy to lead the show with. Make sure you've watched the program, folks. I mean, I say that, like, can you imagine it was awful or something? And I was like, oh no, I can't do that. But no, it won't be, because anything James puts out, a lot of work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears goes into these things. So yeah. Dan, it's the 7th of October as we're recording this right now, just so folks listening to it in the next couple of weeks can date this. But do you know what day it is on the 20th of October, Dan?
What day or what date?
Well,
I'm guessing it's an anniversary. I want to be a smart ass and say it's the 20th, but go on.
It's the first Global Disclosure Day. So this is headed up by the New Paradigm Institute. That's my segue, folks, onto this. So a little bit of information. If you go to newparadigminstitute.org, I'll put the link in the description, but there's a little video to accompany this as well. So it says, on this day, our Citizens for Disclosure groups in 43 states and around the world will convene watch parties for a 2-hour live stream event. I'll just go on to read. This first of its kind event will feature notable speakers in the disclosure movement, testimonials from local activist groups, and special videos about the latest information on UAP. We are witnessing a major sea change in the history of the UFO UAP campaign. Up until very recently, the onus was on the movement to prove UFOs were real. Now, so much information has come out at such high levels of the US government that the burden is now on those who tried to keep UFOs a secret to prove that they are not real. We are in a new time. And then it gives you a form on the right-hand side just to ask for information to send out, and you can host your own watch party and stuff like that as well. It seems to be running 1 p.m. Eastern to 7 p.m. Central European time. Interesting to see that side by side. But yeah, Global Disclosure Day, Dan. It'll get some eyes. I don't know how much it'll pull in folk from the outside of the UFO community. Couple of weeks ahead of the hearings, but yeah, who knows? I mean, it can't be a bad thing as long as it's done well and tastefully.
Yeah, absolutely. We need more events like this that, like you say, are tasteful, keep the bar high, and we're not just trotting out the same crap as they trotted out in the 80s and 90s with the X-Files music and things. The conversation has changed, and so many people now are looking for spaces where they can listen in and have these conversations. And I've heard from countless academics that are like, yeah, I kind of hover about on social networks, but I'm never, ever going to interact with anyone talking about this stuff. These are places for those people to go to get more information and to clear this muddy water and to really focus and zero in on who they should be listening to, what they should be listening to. So yeah, I'm hoping for some really cool speakers. Danny Sheehan's a heavy hitter in this subject and has access to a lot of really great people. So very curious to see who shows up on that day. I'll be watching.
And the New Paradigm Institute also, Dan, today on X/Twitter. Do you feel in modern day we've got so many acronyms, but you end up just saying both of them anyway, or like names for stuff? So like WWE and WWF, you've got Twitter and X, we've got UFO and UAP. You still end up saying the same thing. It's like, for Christ's sake.
WWW makes me laugh because that's like 9 syllables, and World Wide Web is 3. So I'm like, it's not shorter. It's not even. It doesn't help.
Yeah,
but
true.
my mum would be typing in World Wide Web if we said World Wide Web.
So New Paradigm Institute, folks, they have basically put on their online socials. The New Paradigm Institute has curated a collection of digitized motion pictures from the National Archives and Records Administration related to UFOs and UAP, now available viewing on our YouTube channel. Rather than navigating through NARA's extensive bulk download page, they're organized and ready for immediate playback. I know we've not looked at them properly, Dan, but I did have a quick look at the playlist, and it looks really easy to use, folks. And there are loads of very short clips, but also longer interviews with folks from there's clips from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And it's folks involved in military, various programs. There are very short UFO videos of lights in the sky. So yeah, that seems like a pretty handy, easy thing to read through and jump through. I think that'll be something worth kind of having a browse at, Dan, over the next couple of days.
Yeah, 100%. We need more on-ramps like that. You can go to the National Archive website and you can look through hundreds and thousands of pages of documents about the UFO issue since the 40s. But who wants to do that, right? No one reads these days. These are really concise videos that you kind of get the main points, and a little insight into that kind of stuff. The UK National Archive did a similar thing with Dr. David Clarke, who actually was the guy who found the Calvine photo.
Yep.
So you can go to the UK National Archive website and kind of look at some of those, and it's essentially a guide through, for the people who don't have the time to sit down and read thousands of these pages, and to make the connections and so on and so forth. It's really great. And this is actually not the videos on the New Paradigm Institute, but the documents themselves going to the National Archives are the result of the NDAA UAP language that was passed last year, where all these different organizations by law have to be given all of their UFO stuff to the National Archives now for public kind of for public access. And yeah, it's great to see that happening, and it's great to see the New Paradigm Institute helping people digest all that.
Did you have some notes, Dan, on the Cliff Sims comments you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, really interesting, right? Cliff Sims was a former DDNI. It's an acronym again, so I'm going to say the other thing as well. You just said Deputy Director of National Intelligence. He was on the team there, so really high up. And he was on a show where he was talking about it was Sean Ryan's podcast, right? And
Sean Ryan,
yeah. He was talking about people at the ODNI trying to receive the briefing on UFOs from the people that were given it, which I guess would have been Arrow and the UAPTF during that time. And he was saying that basically everyone there was, except like the tippy top of the food chain, was kicked out of the room. And the only people that were there were, the heads of the ODNI. And he was emphasizing that the ODNI as a group were people who have access to, they're briefing the president, so they have access to the super sensitive stuff on a daily basis to do their jobs. And they weren't allowed to be in the room during that UFO briefing. So he was making the point that the people doing the briefing were very, very sensitive about who has access to these programs. Tim McMillan followed up and kind of said that it wasn't a big deal. And then Douglas Dean Johnson swung in and said, not so quick. And basically they came down, Tim McMillan being a journalist at the wonderful Debrief, by the way. And Douglas Dean Johnson has a past in lobbying on the Hill, so he kind of knows the inner workings of all that. And they came to an agreement that it's just another one of these kind of bullet points and flags that show that this is being taken seriously inside the halls of Congress and in the administration. For all of the people saying there's nothing there are these really highly classified meetings going on, really sensitive meetings going on, and you're not allowed to just be in the room to go, I'm on a UFO briefing. This is a national security issue that's being taken seriously by all of the people that take national security, against adversaries like China and Russia and so on and so forth. It's on that level. And yet it's not being discussed kind of publicly, openly on that level. So there's a big kind of question mark as to why they're not being transparent about this if there's nothing to it. Yet again, I can see you watching The Fly. It's back. Some non-human intelligence is annoying.
This is the sequel to the Fly who was there before, folks. It is literally a shed I record in, and it is not like sealed or waterproof or watertight by any means. So yeah. One moment, Dan.
In news aside from that, just staying on subject with the Fly that's attacking you, researchers over the past couple of weeks came out, and there's an amazing website on it. They actually imaged a fly's brain and kind of managed to look at every single connection inside a fly's brain. So imagine how small a fly is. They've looked at how it works, basically. They have a picture of the inner workings, and we don't even have that with our minds yet. And the researchers are saying that they think we're about 30 or 40 years away from being able to look at the human mind and know what everything's for and how it's communicating, and so on and so forth, which I've always maintained stuff like that it's overlapping with the kind of conversations we have here about UFOs and UAP. Consciousness comes into it. What is consciousness? With flies, they're closer than ever to figuring that out. And, today flies, tomorrow humans. So yeah, it's really cool to see them advancing on that front.
There we have it. Dan says flies are aliens. That's why I start from that. So a lot of listener questions to get through, folks. So for some of you, this might split into 2 episodes because there's loads to get through. Thank you to everyone who sent stuff in. We'll kick off, Dan, with some questions around the program, just to kind of follow up on some of those aspects.
Which program?
Well, the program, the documentary by James Fox. Very right to clear me up on that one. So Kirk asks, where will we be able to see the program? So yeah, just to clarify again, right now there is nowhere that is confirmed to show it, and that's as of 7:10 UK time on the 7th of October. I've seen people sharing online, Dan, and I know we've kind of mentioned this before, but I want to bring it up again, saying, oh, Plex has a listing for it, or Apple TV has a listing for it. Or, no, until James Fox tells you where it's going to be, I don't think he's even signed the deal, unless it happened today at this point, for it to be streamed anywhere. So whatever people are posting, when James Fox posts where it's going to be and what it's going to be, much like when we kept seeing dates for Lou Elizondo's book, and they changed on a monthly basis just because people put placeholders up. There was no release date until we saw the release date. So that's it, folks. So there's nowhere yet to be able to see it, but we'll kind of find out soon enough. If you had to guess, Dan, when we were going to see it, where would you think?
I want to see it sooner rather than later, so I'm hoping for a pre-holiday release, and I expect James is eager to make that too.
I'm going to guess the end of November.
Okay. So we're in the same ballpark, really.
Yeah. End of November.
Yeah.
If not, I wonder, is it January?
Yeah, I mean, if it doesn't make Christmas, it's going to still come out sooner rather than later, isn't it?
Yeah.
James has been insistent on that.
Question from Fred, and Fred, I know Fred is particularly skeptical at times on these things, but always a welcome chatter over on Patreon or on the Discord. Fred says, odd that James Fox releases a trailer without any confirmed distribution. Given the success of his other well-produced documentaries, one would expect there would be many interested parties to release the program. What's really going on here? Do you want to lead on that one, Dan? Or
I mean, this is one of those things where you can look into it too much, I think. James is eager to get it out. He's been teasing this trailer coming and the release and the movie and everything coming real soon. So I think James was just eager to get it out, and it seems like he had a contact at Screen Rant that was able to host and put an article up, in the trades. Deadline had it up too. And with this kind of stuff, when you're selling movies, it's better to have, if I walk into a room and I say, I have a movie, is one thing. If I walk into a room and I say, I have a movie and the trailer's had 1 million views, that's a great thing to be able to say when you're selling something, that there's interest there, that the investors are going to get the money back if they pay you for the film to distribute it. So I kind of see it as James, trying to wet the investors' whistle a little bit, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think, again, success is relative, because going to Netflix, who I imagine are pitched 100 documentaries every single day, regardless of the credibility of the documentary maker. And I think for a lot of folks, James Fox is the documentary maker in the UFO circle and has been for a long time. To go to Netflix, maybe Netflix offered them, and this is literally me making up numbers, right? Like, okay, we'll give you like $100,000 for your documentary.
You heard it first.
But then we saw the trailer cost him $25,000.
Yep.
So let's just say the making of the documentary cost him $30,000 to $50,000. So already he's down $70,000, $75,000, or investors are down that, or however he's financed it. I don't know, right? But then you go, oh wow, they're giving him $100,000. He's making $20,000 for his whole documentary. It's took him like how many years and all that work and effort. And it's like, well, actually, but to Netflix, maybe that's what it's worth. Maybe there's add-ons depending on streams and all that kind of stuff, but there's no real guarantees. So I think it's easy to be like, well, that one went really well. Why isn't this one? I think there's plenty of... Dan, we were just talking about the Joker and the Joker 2. Or Joker, sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
And how massive the first one was and how the second one is bombed. No spoilers or anything, or we won't talk about the movie. But just off the back of the first one, the second one's not seeing that same success.
Yeah, that's right. The first one made over $1 billion, and the second one is making less money than Mobius, I read.
Yeah. And that's not that the program won't be fantastic, by the way. The program, I am happy to put money on, will be very, very good. But I
Yes.
don't think there's a guarantee with these things. So James is quite right to do his due diligence and make sure that he's getting the best deal for himself, his family, but also for his work, and that that's protected as well, that he can take that elsewhere if he wants to, and he does own the content and all that kind of stuff as well. So it could be that some of the bigger streamers want full ownership of the content as well, and that's not something James is willing to do. I would just hope, however, and when it does come out, if there is a paid option for it, that folks go and buy the documentary and they give up the 10, 20, $30, whatever it is, or pounds to help support, kind of one of our own as such in the community doing that kind of work. So but I think we'll find out. I don't think there's anything to it, Fred, in that respect.
I'd way prefer, if I'm given the option of watching it on Netflix via the monthly money that I'm paying the subscription versus giving James $20 directly through his own website, I'm definitely going to go to his website and pay James directly, because I know he gets to keep all of that then, versus just whatever Netflix giving him. What's a stream worth these days?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think there's too much to it, but Fred's got another question coming up later on. Kate says, Dan, the trailer for the program seems like it's going to be more of the same. It feels like many shows are just rehashing the same info over and over. What are your hopes and expectations for it? Do you think it's likely those already well versed in the subject will learn anything new? When do you think documentary makers like Fox will be ready to approach the more woo side of the phenomenon? So for my three answers, Dan, what are my hopes and expectations? I think I've said pretty high, and I expect there will be new information. Yes, and that's not from a place of, it's just a gut feeling. I think we're going to get some new stuff in this. If the phenomenon was a wonderful summary of everything that's been and kind of where we're at, I think the program really drills down into a niche. I think we might get, and I'm all for this, a little bit more speculation in the program, just given the very nature of what it's talking about and crash retrievals and that kind of real murky black budget world. And when do I think documentary makers like Fox will be ready to approach the more woo side of the phenomenon? I think James has done that in the past and he's not scared to. I think it's a fine line to tread, and we've talked about this before, haven't we, Dan, about what's too much and when do you go from what is essentially a nuts and bolts crash retrieval program to experiencers. Is that something you do just leave out of something like this?
Yeah, absolutely. James is going to be approaching this in a really conscientious manner. Like he's not just going to be throwing everything down, because abductee stories go, or contact stories go everywhere from, Betty and Barney Hill, where it was fairly straightforward, as the abductions we kind of, a typical abduction goes. I say typical abduction.
Your bog standard Tuesday night abduction.
But then they go all the way to Joe Simonson being given pancakes by the aliens and having a little exchange, and it just gets a bit too crazy for people, all the way to hybrids then and those discussions. I feel like this is going to be a more grounded kind of affair for people who are interested in the approach that the phenomenon took. Even for some of those people, you could hear them having trouble talking about moment of contact and the Virginia case with the alien kind of running around like that. That was even over some people's red lines. James is going to appeal to the masses with this one. It's a puzzle piece. It's not the be all and end all. But I agree, it's going to be drilling down into its namesake, the program, referring to the legacy program that's been running for, God knows how long now. 900 years at this point, right? And it's going to be inspiration for the public to ask, WTF is going on? Well, tell us what's going on. There seems to be something here. A lot of people are saying there's something here. I'm hoping for compelling first-hand witnesses. That's, I guess, the one thing that the Hal quote that I brought up earlier kind of alludes to, that he seems to be a first-hand witness to this program and to working in this program. I don't want to see just Hal. I want to see more. And I think that will really set some fire under some butts if that's included.
A few other questions were on a similar vein, Dan, but I think a nice way to wrap up part one, which largely focuses on the program, the documentary, and the listener questions part of that, is around the idea that a lot of folks seem, maybe, I don't know if the word's worried or concerned, but a lot of this content, is it going to be for the UFO community, or is it going to be for an audience that doesn't know it, but all the UFO community knows this already? And I think there's a kind of line that it must be difficult to traverse on that. But do you not think we are at a point where, given what's happened the last 5-6 years, 2017's what's 7 years, okay? There is a space for documentaries, books, movies, just media in general to catch people up from a new place, where we're no longer going back to Roswell. We're not going back to Betty and Barney Hill necessarily. I know there's a Netflix documentary coming out, isn't there? The Obamas
Sure,
are
yeah.
involved in. But there is something to say, actually, let's look at the UFO topic from 2017. I think if you're trying to capture a public, and I mean a true worldwide imagination now, I think there's a lot of stuff to go, right, here's some new books, here's some new movies, and I'm thinking of like Spielberg's new E.T. movie, where
Yeah.
you can go back and go, oh, watch Close Encounters, watch E.T. A lot of folks that are younger don't want to watch Close Encounters or watch E.T. They don't want to go and watch documentaries from 20, 30, 40 years ago, 10 years ago. Stuff looks old to them. So let's give them some new material, some new stuff. And do you know what? Some of us in the UFO community just have to accept and understand it. Dan, both of us are nearly 40. So, we're middle-aged.
Oh, God.
I know,
Time flies.
terrifying, right? But there are going to be a whole load of folks coming through to this topic who are young and naive to it and unsure, and their exposure to it is Stephen Greer on Joe Rogan and that kind of stuff, and it's like that's their on-ramp. But do you know what? For a lot of folks that are involved in this now for 20, 30, 40 years, their on-ramp was a cheesy newsletter or a VHS of the alien, autopsy from the 90s. So that was people's on-ramps back then. And then look how far those people have had to come to get to this point. So I've got no issue with this bringing in an audience or being for people newer to the subject. But I just think the nuance of talking about a crash retrieval program lends itself to there will be new information. And especially with a Hal Puthoff, who doesn't do a whole lot of talking.
No.
Hal's not on the podcast circuit, for example, which is frustrating, but hey ho, it's rare that he goes and does these kind of things. So when he talks, people listen. And I'm expecting quite a lot from it. So is that fair?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you just said. Yeah, and that's exactly why I'm excited to hear Hal talk, because you hear conversations about him, but you don't hear him talk often. Or he does that. There was a great, I think it was Jesse Michaels, American Alchemy, where he was talking with Eric Weinstein, and just about physics and so on and so forth. And a lot of people not knowing who Hal is would watch that and go, who the hell am I listening to? Why is this guy important? And things like this upcoming documentary can, let everybody know how important Hal was, and in Hal's own words too. So I'm really excited to see him in there. I've said time and time again now that he should be on the stand. I'd love to see him testify and to kind of spill the beans, even if it was in a skiff afterwards, to the armed services committees and so on and so forth. But wouldn't surprise me if he's done that already. So really great to see him talking to the public here.
I'm going to hand over the final word, Dan, to one of the long-time listeners and supporters of the podcast, Gnosis, who I think had a nice little paragraph. So if you're listening to this, folks, part 2 will be more listener questions, but focusing on a load of other aspects of the conversation. We'll kind of wrap up the program side of things here. But Gnosis says, since Arrow were formed, all signs point to a DoD strategy where you admit to a phenomenon, commit to declassifying a few orb sightings, and propose to establish a scientific investigation, basically to start again on the topic from scratch. What I hope the program does is show the public that this was a misdirection, and that there is a very real chance this was an attempt to bury the history of this topic and continue the cover-up of material acquisition. I hope this is the fuel that fires up Congress, not just asking for better reporting on current UAP events under the guise of air safety, but to uncover something much darker that has been hidden from view and taxpayer transparency. Congress could solve this tomorrow, but they can't just rely on volunteers to come forward. At some point, they have to call on the US Air Force, the Department of Energy, and CIA insiders. And here we are, Dan, on part 2. If you're on the paid feed, you're hearing it all in a oneer. If you're on the free feeds, then it's split up into 2. But it made sense as I burped. It made sense just the way we're kind of going through it, Dan. So we'll be crack on then with a bit of a mishmash then of questions around the second part. So we'll kick off with Fred, and he says, Dan, interesting, we've not brought up the UAP Disclosure Act yet. So the UAPDA has not passed and still looks to be unlikely that it's included in the 2025 NDAA. Additionally, unneeded elements remain, such as the eminent domain clause. It feels like this is all just a head fake meant to appease the public into thinking that the politicians are trying to do the will of the people. Furthermore, it's been over a year since David Grush testified, and we've seen no progress. What, if anything, will ever compel the government to disclose? Are we insane to think this will ever happen? Now, if you remember part 1, Dan, I did say Fred can be quite skeptical and pessimistic. So on that, we've got the elements of the question there, Dan, that the NDA looks unlikely to pass. I'll say I agree. We might get some aspects of it through, but I don't think any of the big stuff will. It's been over a year since Grush testified, and we've seen no progress. I don't think that's true. I think there's been a lot of stuff happened in that time. Just what's happening in the background with the whole whistleblower process. The hearings we're going to have in November, I don't think necessarily happen without what Grush done. Is that
agreed? Yeah.
Yeah. Is that fair?
Yeah.
No slight on anyone else. And what, if anything, will ever compel the government to disclose? I don't think it's the government that needs to disclose. It's almost like small aspects of the government that are keeping this a secret just either finally have to crack, or they just they collapse under the pressure to do it. Or conversation for a different day, Dan. Something else happens that they have no choice but to disclose. And we have the chance that China comes out and says something, or Russia comes out and says something, or we get some 2025 Phoenix Lights mass sighting, but now everyone's got camera phones. Maybe that happens.
Yeah, exactly. I think what's compelling the government to talk about this is, and people call it the threat narrative, we can have a conversation over whether it is or isn't, that's a different point, but there is a threat that they're going to lose control of the process, that if they do know something and they don't talk about it soon, that somebody else is going to take the reins in some way. That somebody else could be the NHI, it could be China, it could be Russia, it could be anyone, rogue elements of the US, military industrial complex, anything like that. It seems like they're being pushed to discuss this, to go beyond what we know as the Collins Elite, the religious angles, to kind of say, angels and demons, angels and demons, it's like that's old hat. Like we need to, whatever these things are, no matter what you want to call them, we need to start figuring this out, because they're becoming relevant, because they're buzzing our planes and they're getting near commercial flights and things like that. And as we saw just last year, or earlier this year, my mind is muddled, but the Chinese balloon shoot down and the 3 objects that they shot down when they opened up the filters.
Yeah.
Being blind to the UAP issue is letting a lot of other issues kind of flourish, things like drones and stuff like that. So they need to kind of close those gaps. So the summary of that, I guess, would be, the threat is compelling them to start having this conversation. Also, access to tech, democratizing access. You had those, I forget the guys' names now, those great guys who had their van with all the kit in, and they'd been studying
the Tedesco
phenomena. Tedesco's, that's it. Yes.
On the coast,
they're not affiliated with the government or any organization. They are unto themselves doing a scientific investigation. And I think what they're doing speaks volumes in terms of
their life-saving doing it. They've just been on with Ross Coulter. So if people check out News Nation's reality check, and obviously I interviewed them a couple of months ago, lovely guys, but they spent their life savings to do that, so it's not as if they're in it for the funding or the money. It's like that was their money they spent because they just love the topic.
Yeah, and this is, we can go right back to the Wright brothers with their plane. Similar thing, right? That's their passion. That's what they're putting their mind to. They had access to all the technology they needed to be able to make flight a reality. And we have the modern world that we have. Flight didn't just bring planes. it brung getting to space and satellite orbits and GPS and all of the things that derive from that kind of thinking. So there's a lot up for grabs here if the government lets it go to people that can't control those aspects of it, or get patents on things that the government might want money for and things like that. So yeah, I think there's a perfect storm at the moment pushing the government to talk about this in baby steps. One thing I'd love to see from those hearings that Grush was in that we hadn't seen, he said at one point that he was happy to give it was people that weren't talking to him basically about this issue that he knew had information, that he was happy to give that list over to Congress. I'd love to see that list to see who he'd identified that isn't playing ball, that he has absolute evidence does have information on this. That's something that would mark, a lot of progress. But again, I couldn't action that right from where I am in this room. That seems to be with the right people to be able to do their jobs. And I totally agree. If you take those hearings last year away, we don't get the hearings this year. We don't get the bits of the NDAA UAP Disclosure Act through that we did get. And just to add in here as well, that we have heard from Jared Moskowitz and Mike Rounds that they're trying not to let this go. That even though that we've heard that the UAP Disclosure Act isn't going to pass or wasn't included in the managers package, as they call it, if people, well, let me just read the quote from Representative Jared Moskowitz gotten from Askapol. Great work again. They do such good work, boots on the ground. Moskowitz said, "It just depends whether the majority here makes that a big deal, whether the members that you and I talk to that care about the UAP stuff, whether they can get the speaker to make it a priority." That's really great news, because it means if you get in touch with your members of Congress, they're going to start talking to the speaker to make it a priority. So there's your lever. Get in touch with your representatives, again, even if you've done it before, and let them know.
Yeah, I still think there's too much around this entire US election for the UFO topic to touch the sides.
Probably, but hope for the best, prepare for the worst, as they say.
Yeah,
doesn't hurt.
Do you think they have to drop the whole UAP Disclosure Act if it doesn't go through this time? Like, can you really see us being back here, Dan, in another year and be like, okay, it's UAP Disclosure Act 3.0? Does it just become a bit of a running joke or a self-fulfilling prophecy then that it'll never go through and they have to do something else?
Maybe. Like last year, we heard the term gutted. It was gutted. It was pulled apart. It was destroyed, whatever. Whereas this year, it's a little less sensational. It wasn't singled out. It's just not passed as kind of a matter of course because it wasn't done business when they were trying to essentially bundle all of the done business together to say, okay, this is going forward. It wasn't agreed upon. So I guess one of two things can happen. They can either try third time lucky, but like you said, it's kind of like flogging a dead horse, or they can break it apart and try and pass it as its own piece of legislation. Now, that would be really interesting because that does bring more visibility to it, and you would likely see it debated on the floor of the House or the Senate and things like that then. Whether more visibility is good, I don't know. I've said in the past that I think, all the stuff that passed in previous years smoothly wasn't spoken about and didn't have a lot of attention. So we'll see. But it would be nice to know that it was passing on its own merits because the whole of the Senate or the whole of the House was behind pushing it through, as opposed to it just being attached to something else that kind of pulls it through.
Yeah. Fair enough. Paul says, since I've listened to your podcast, I've noticed you reference a lot of movies and would imagine you're a big fan of anything related to the UFO topic. Have you heard the theory of how perhaps we are being programmed by movies and TV about the possibility of aliens and that our government knows about it and is actively keeping it under wraps until a time we might be ready? I've always drawn the similarities between, say, a Tony Stark and a Robert Bigelow, like these super smart billionaires who have access to all these otherworldly technologies in the universe. Maybe a silly question, but was just curious of you and Dan's thoughts on that and if it may be true. Cheers, pal. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I think so. We won't dwell on it too much, Dan. We've talked on this one a few times, but Paul's kind of newer. I think, like we mentioned there, there's, again, a lot of stuff in the pipeline. There might be some other UFO documentaries coming on the TV in a few weeks' time, towards the end of October. I don't think maybe are being advertised too much yet. not my place to say. Nothing top secret, but there might be some stuff coming on. And if you've then got James Fox's stuff, if you've got Spielberg making a new ET show, what other stuff, Dan's out and about that's kind of UFO related in that sense?
I've just started watching. There's a really great, if people are into anime, there's an anime on Netflix or Hulu or Crunchyroll, whichever you have access to, called Dan to Dan, which is literally about the main character is obsessed with UFOs. And in the first episode, someone says UFO and he's like, actually, it's UAP. So it seems to be, another space where you can discuss this kind of stuff. This was a really interesting question, I thought, because it takes me back to, the CIA had Operation Mockingbird, I want to say, where they literally saw if they could put out content and control a narrative on something. This is a real thing that they did. So it has precedent that they've done this to kind of get issues out there. It also makes me think of MK Ultra, where they were given kind of participants drugs, and this was part of like a program they denied existed, and it came out kind of, I want to say, in the 90s, maybe the 80s, that they were doing this. But yeah, they were given participants LSD and trying to influence them in certain ways. And a number of those participants kind of became, Charles Manson and the Unabomber and stuff like that. So they really messed with people's minds. But in the same way as Mockingbird, it's kind of trying to control how you give someone a message and how you can think. So like I said, there's precedent for it. And in the modern day, we have stuff like TikTok and, Facebook, and the news is kind of more connected than ever. I don't know if you've seen that really creepy clip of all the different news channels kind of syncing up with exactly what they're saying. Yeah. It's really creepy. But it just goes to show that, like, yeah, absolutely, there's room for something like this. The whole thing about movies really intrigues me because there's a piece around, remote viewing and intuition and tapping into certain ideas that I think kind of may creep into creative projects. When they say an idea's time just comes, and then you have a movie like Ants and Bug's Life, or Finding Nemo and Shark's Tale. They come along at the same time, and they're not necessarily connected. So it's really, some people wonder if an idea is a life form that like gloms onto us and then we express it. And something that Peter Lavender has said in War, he talks about it especially, is that artists and creatives of all kind, they can think outside the box with this. And outside the box thinking is most likely what is going to lead to a better solution than what we have before, just with it's ET, Just take Nope, for example. That was a lot of people's first introduction to it not being ET. And the whole point of the film was, when you think this thing is ET and it's not, it's really dangerous for you, and we should start thinking outside the box. And that ending works for some people and it doesn't work for others. And it's interesting to see people's reactions to it, whether they think it could be real or it might not be real, depending on what their expectations are, So I think movies, books, any kind of film that touches this subject is going to provide us with maybe just a little bit of a different way to think about what we're dealing with, instead of all the baggage of the last 90, 100 years.
Except the movie Skyline from about 15 years ago. That was
that was awful, yeah.
Fucking terrible. So Disney Pixar, Dan, their 28th release is due on the 13th of June 2025.
Elio.
And it's Elio, yep, who is an underdog with an active imagination who finds himself inadvertently beamed up to the Communiverse, an interplanetary organization with representatives from galaxies far and wide. Mistakenly identified as Earth's ambassador to the rest of the universe, he starts to form new bonds with eccentric aliens while discovering who he's truly meant to be. So there's one that will get the kids involved in this
Sounds
whole
heartwarming. There's a question for you, though. If aliens took you and said to you, they just started treating you as the ambassador of the Earth, would you correct them?
I mean, who am I to tell them that I'm not? If they've made that decision, Dan, then. Well, who would you say it? Who would you say it is, though? Like,
it's a good point, though, right? Like they could be thinking in a different way, where they're not looking like. Do you explain democracy to them and how each country runs and yada 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 yada? Till you're blue in the face, or do you just go, I mean, you're talking to me, so I'll do the best that I can.
Well, on that, Dan, can we just Jason sent in a question, and Jason peeked behind the actor's curtain here. I read your question to Dan. It was 18 pages front and back, as Ross once said to Rachel. It wasn't quite that long, but it was pretty epic. So to cut it down for the benefit of anyone who has a device with doesn't have unlimited storage, I've boiled it down to this, Jason. So apologies if this bastardizes your question, but Jason asks Dan. He wants to know if Haim Eshed, a former Israeli space security chief, made comments that there is a galactic federation out there and we are potentially members. If we were to go up for membership, realistically, he thinks it would be the US intelligence service that would be our representatives. How do you feel about that, and who would you prefer? So if there was that opportunity of, I suppose, Arrival would be the closest movie type scenario to that being plausible, who would you put up for this is the Earth's representative?
It's a really good question. And almost mind-boggling. I think...
Not the US intelligence service, for a start. That's not...
Yeah, no, not them. And not politicians. Because they represent a certain part of humanity that thinks a particular way, and just... their goals aren't aligned with everyday folk, right? I don't think.
It would have to be some kind of scientific group.
Yeah, like I was gonna say, I'd love maybe to look at some of the people who are looking into communicating with whales or octopus or something like that, who are thinking in that kind of way. I guess the Amy Adams character from Arrival, who are really approaching it with all of the gravitas, and they know what's at
you'd
stake.
have to have like physicists and stuff like that in there, and some people that understand breakthrough technologies or stuff like that as well, like a group. There would have to be like a mixed group. I don't think you would need maybe one military type person, but they would have to be nice.
Yeah, at the very least, right?
Yeah.
And if we can't get those science groups, then I submit that we just send Keanu Reeves.
Yeah, he seems like he'd be very nonplussed about the whole thing. Do you know who I definitely would not send is like a group of like poets and artists?
Like, it would be too much, wouldn't it? You almost want the group of poets and artists to watch the interaction and to take away from it.
Yeah, and just stay in a room and leave everyone alone. No offense, man. But we'd end up getting blown up. But no, like scientists, people like that. I've always said Stephen Fry for my kind of celebrity point of view.
Stephen Fry, yeah. What about Jack Sarfati? You can just go call them stupid within 20 minutes.
Yeah, I don't think they would have the time to spend with Jack. I think he's very thorough. But no, definitely, I think Stephen Fry, from a UK point of view, very intelligent, witty, rational.
Does that change if I was to say we can raise anyone from history from the dead and you can send them? And no controversial jokes right now.
No. I suppose an obvious one from that point of view would be like Tesla. But then that's a very niche point of view to go at that.
Sure.
And he'd just be going home anyway, wouldn't he, potentially? So
yeah, Elvis, let's end Elvis.
Yeah. I think I'd still be going probably like a Stephen Fry.
Sure, like very eloquent, very intelligent,
knows a lot
very
about
mindful.
Thinker,
yeah. Stephen Fry's not a bad shout.
Can
we send Keanu Reeves, Stephen Fry? I'm going to put Dr. Michelle Fournet in there, who is trying to decode whale song out in Alaska, because she's the only person I know that does that research, and also
you're smoking that dead horse of that one person.
when I find another researcher that's doing it, then
you'll start naming them instead. That's when Dan's read in the book. You remember like a few months ago when you just every other show you were talking about Keel, and it was
I wouldn't send Keel,
hasn't he?
I wouldn't send Keel. Steve Irwin.
Oh, obviously bringing him back, yeah.
Yeah, if I could bring him back, Steve Irwin, I think he would be wonderful. Just mindful, very conscientious, very lovely human being. Yeah. I think he in a lot of ways represents the best of humanity.
Yeah, Travis Taylor. He could film the whole thing. Yep.
Travis Barker.
Yeah. But anyway, good question. Before we get too off topic, good question. That is one. If people have got any ideas on that, who they would send, like, be interesting to hear them. Can kind of read them out on the next show. But who would be like a genuinely quite good representative or representation of the human race and human species. Question from Chris. Now, Chris, you didn't quite give Jason a run for his money, but it's a longer question, but I think it's well laid out, Dan, here. So I was just catching up on the episodes from last week where you answered listener questions. Good for us. I want to submit a question for you about Roswell. On the Need to Know podcast, Lou Elizondo was asked about Roswell and whether it was truly a non-human intelligence crash. Lou says, I have been approved by the Pentagon to talk about this particular aspect. He then says that Roswell was indeed a crash. This directly contradicts the official US government position on Roswell, which it was debris from Project Mogul. So this would seem to be releasing previously classified information. But Lou indicated that DOPSR authorized him to contradict the government position. Lou then says that there were reports generated as a result of that event that colleagues of mine had access to, as his evidence for why it was a UAP crash with biologics. Why can't Lou provide us with the documents and reports that he says are the direct evidence of that Roswell was a crash, or that Roswell was a crash? If those documents are still classified after 70 years, then why did DOPSR allow Lou to talk about them? Two things. One, Chris, I would say that, and Dan will correct me otherwise, DOPSR isn't there to differentiate the truth. It's there to stop any national security or that kind of stuff getting out. So Lou could have came out and said that, Roswell was actually a crash where 100 ferries on board a massive flying boat in the sky hit the New Mexico desert, and the only one left behind was Tinkerbell, and that's where Disney came from, right? He could say that, and DOPSR would clear it, because he's not actually, it doesn't matter if he's lying or telling the truth, he's not giving away any national security secrets. I suppose where there would be an issue is if Lou did stick those documents in his book. If he had access to those documents and it's not just that he's heard about them, then that would be an issue, Dan, wouldn't it? And DOPSR would say, you can talk about that, you can't put those documents in your book, because then that's proof. So that's where that comes from.
Yeah, exactly. I think that answers most of the question. I would also say, he's the question asker. Why am I the audience member?
Yeah.
Said about it contradicts the US position. I just add in like which US position. It's changed over the years, and that's kind of half of the issue with this particular event. Is they said it was one thing, then they changed their mind, then they changed their mind. If you want to go with the initial report, it was a source of the crash in the New Mexico desert. Then it was changed, and then it was changed. So it's kind of a choose your own adventure thing. And as for the documents being able to be released, I would imagine they're classified by their very nature. It's never bad to say this classified thing exists. It's just bad to give the details of the classified thing. So as long as Lou doesn't put those reports in his book, he's all good. But he also can't release them because they would be under lock and key.
And also, Lou does say that it was secondhand information. The reports were generated that colleagues of mine had access to. So I imagine that someone has told Lou, this is what happened, I've seen the documents. Or I know
and we can
someone that saw
imply
the documents.
We can imply then that, because it was Hal that was telling him about this in the book, right? And it seemed to imply that it was Hal that told him all this stuff. If Hal was in the program, as Hal's statement seems to imply in the trailer, then it seems to be that Hal is the guy with access to this stuff. So, email Hal. Let's have at it. Hal, where are the documents?
Hal.putov@me.com. So a question from
Imagine that was his email now.
Good question though. Hal Putov's going to get in touch with me now and be like, I don't know who you are, but you've given him my email address on a show, and I'm like, I totally guessed that, mate. So yeah, everyone email hal.putov@me.com, see what happens. Derek says, hey Andy, a question for you and Dan to answer on your next update episode. In Lou's book, so Lou Elizondo's book, chapter 16, The Aha Moment, he talks about Hal Putov's theory that a gravity bubble was the key for explaining the 5 observables. This is what Bob Lazar talks about in his book, that the sports model created a heart-shaped bubble around the craft. Heart-shaped bubble, of course, being Nirvana's final single.
I literally just thinking of that.
It's actually heart-shaped box, folks, for any Nirvana fans kicking off. But that was a little joke. Do ye think... I think that should have been do you think, but it could have been do ye, but it says ye. Do ye think this adds more credibility to Bob's story? So Dan, I'm going to ask you that one first. So gravity bubbles, Lou, Bob Lazar talked about many a decade ago. Is it adding more credibility to what he said back then?
For me, no. Purely because this showed up
Oh.
in sci-fi novels before Hal spoke about it. Hal wasn't the first person to talk about this. And as we've seen, just because things look alike, it doesn't mean they are the same thing. It's easy to say, yeah, you go in a bubble and you travel around in it. It's harder to actually do it, and to show the physics behind it and so on and so forth. People that know physics seem to think that Lazar is full of it. But then it might just be physics that they don't know, right? But yeah, I wouldn't say it adds credibility in any way whatsoever. It adds intrigue, I would say, though.
Okay, so I'm going to try and do a devil's advocate thing here then, Dan, okay? Because I expected you would say no to that. So, if Bob Lazar has made a comment decades ago that whether it was out there or not already, and people are saying it's got credibility because Hal Puthoff told Lou this, and there is a lot of elements of Lou's book where it's stuff that he's been told, and a lot of folk of anyone who's maybe looked or criticised elements of the book have said, some folk, sorry, and we talked about this before, is there's a lot of second-hand information around what Lou is saying. But I don't think it's unfair to say you're in a position where you believe Lou, you're happy to back up what he says based on who he is and the position he held and the work he said he done. So, do you not feel you're giving Bob Lazar a harder time because of, like you say, that bias? Or are you just doing the same to Lou on the other side of it? Because what's the difference for you to explain to me there? Bob Lazar did say that, but it seems very much like, yeah, Bob said it, so no. But Lou said it, so really interesting. Like, what for you? Explain to me the difference.
Well, so let's separate it a little bit. So if Lou said to me, that's a bubble and this is how it works, my response to that is, oh, well, this is a concept that has come up in sci-fi. I held that to the same standard.
Yeah.
I think we've gone into it before where I've said, Lou's position and so on and so forth is a bit different. And the reason that I'm not so crazy on the Bob Lazar thing is because over the years his story has changed. It's not just the Fallon thing, it's that change in story, it's the witnesses that he says exists that don't seem to exist or that no one can find, the professors that supposedly taught him at Caltech that he at one point said that the professor's name was, I can't remember the name now, but it was XYZ. And it turns out that guy taught him in college and never went to Caltech. And when it was brought up with Bob, he was like, oh, well, it wasn't him then. And it's the change in details of Bob's story that makes me so ropey on it. Whereas, Lou's stuff, it's kind of been consistent, even though, there's some questions around...
Would argue that.
Well, there's some questions around certain things with Lou, with his position and so on and so forth. And I think it's fair to ask the question. I've always said that. It's totally fair to ask the question.
Lou said that himself,
to an answer.
For years, go with the data, don't thingy too much. And I am genuinely just asking you to clear that up, because with Bob, I'm trying to get at the point that if Lou's book, which for many folks is solidifies that this stuff happened or is real. Like, how many folks got in touch to say, does this not just really lend credence to Roswell? Because Lewis said in his book about Roswell. So for me, I don't think it's unfair for that credit to go back there then to be like, actually, Lazar maybe had a lot more going for him than people give him credit for. And I don't know, because Lazar doesn't do a lot of talking these days. But again, look at what a couple of weeks ago we spoke about, all the stuff about Stratton's book coming out, and people started talking online, and we stay away from the gossip mongering and the rumor stuff. As much as some of the speculation is interesting, a lot of folks saying that it's going to shed a lot of light on aspects of the story that may not be accurate from Lou's point of view. We won't know until Jay Stratton's book comes out, and it might actually totally back up what Lou said, in which cases people are like, see, they were literally working together. But yeah, I'm just intrigued by that, because I've always stuck by, I think a lot of Bob Lazar's story is there or thereabouts. There's elements of it which are absolute nonsense, and that's not a pun on element 115. I think there are parts of it where I'm like, no, that doesn't quite add up, but I don't know why. But I think the same for Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, Stephen Greer, anybody involved in the topic at that level. I get why there are inconsistencies or lies. I don't know why, but I understand why there would be.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. I just think that I try not to draw the line between, if Lou said this, then it gives Bob credence. Like, for me, I remember there was a video of Dave Fravor talking with Bob Lazar, and Bob saying, oh, well, that's how I said that moved in 1985. And it's like, well, just because Dave saw it moving that way, it doesn't mean that everything Bob said was correct.
Yeah.
We kind of have to separate those things and judge them on their own merits by the people, themselves, and just try and keep them separately. And then you have the whole issue of the kind of game of telephone that goes on. And Chains of the Sea is one that comes to mind with this.
Yeah.
Where Lou was on a podcast, he mentioned a book, Chains of the Sea, as a way of thinking kind of differently about the phenomenon. Now you hear Chains of the Sea come up as if Lou was giving hints as to the nature of the phenomena.
And
when you explain it to people,
UFOs, yeah.
And when you explain it to people, they don't want to hear it, So there are different aspects of both of these stories that kind of get twisted and tumbled about and are presented in ways they were never presented in the first place, So, for example, we talk about bubbles, and I say, that's been in sci-fi stuff before then. That doesn't mean that Bob saw it in those sci-fi things. It just means that from my perspective, I have to keep that in mind, that Bob could have picked up a book. And, it's fair to kind of, like I said earlier, I've got to be honest about my bias. And that goes both ways,
Yeah.
There was, I think it's the Travis Walton, I nearly said Taylor, the Travis Walton case. Early on, it was the guys in the forest were doing forestry work, and then they saw a UFO. Travis got out to see it, got zapped and abducted, and then was missing for like a week. When you kind of follow that story along, you initially find out or hear that they had no interest in UFO stuff. They'd never read it. And then you read a bit more about each of the people, and you find that they did have interest in UFO stuff, and they were fans of certain kind of recurring publications that spoke about UFOs. And there was even one accusation where one of the publications they were reading had a competition out that they would pay, I can't remember exactly how much, but like $10,000 for a really great UFO abduction story. So it kind of can play into possibly explaining kind of some things. So you've got to just balance all of those things and not take anything as the absolute truth, because that's when we get into these sticky situations where, belief comes into it. I would say I trust Lou in what he's telling us, but if it turns out he's lying, that's not on me, that's on him.
Oh, that's on you. Yeah.
And
that's very
but
fair.
It's the same for Bob as well.
Yeah.
If it turns out he's telling the truth, great. If it turns out he's lying, that's on him. We can't personally invest too much in these things. And as much as I would say I'm friends with Lou would be the first person to say, like, if you have an issue with my story, talk to me about it. And for me, that's something that works in his favor. Whereas Bob shuts the conversation down at that point and doesn't want contact with people, So it's hard to judge. It's not to say that Bob's a liar. It's just to say that I'm a little dubious based on all the things I've read. And also, Bob's story's been around for longer, so there's more data to kind of jump into.
Plot holes in Bob's story, but that's not Bob Lazar. That's a whole lot. We could debate that.
Bob Lazar,
Bob Lazar. I'm just curious about that. Yeah.
No, it's a really important part of the conversation to keep in mind. Like, don't put all your eggs in one basket, because just as the saying goes.
Yeah. Next question from Bob. Why is Dan full of shit? No, that's not. Sorry.
I don't know, Bob. Where can I buy a t-shirt?
Sorry, Lob Bazaar has a question.
That's his email at gmail.com.
You can't say where can I buy a t-shirt. Are you wearing one of your own?
No, this is a Roswell t-shirt.
Okay,
actually.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
From Roswell. Yeah.
They're full of shit as well, aren't they? Selling t-shirts about their fake crash.
This is the nicest UFO shirt I own. It's really comfortable. I thought it was going to be crap just shoveled out the back of a lorry type thing, but no, it's a really nice shirt.
So, Turtle Media. I've heard that abductions and experiences aren't happening anymore. Some kind of agreement with the quote unquote neighbours and stakeholders. Is this true? Most of the cases reported seem to be in years past. I haven't seen this documentary yet. I think that'll be referring to the programme. So I think there's a kind of common like understanding that we get less abduction stories than than we did maybe back in the day. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think just the way those stories were presented back in the day, a few of them just stuck around because it was the 80s, the 70s, the 90s, and they were in newsletters, magazines, and that had a bigger impact if something made it to that level. Whereas now on social media, you could go in or go on Reddit and you could type in abduction stories, and I'm guessing you can find loads of them. So it's like,
Yeah.
who do you believe? Who do you not believe? I could find 100 people telling me they're Jesus.
I love kind of going on Reddit sometimes on the AMA. Ask Reddit, that's the subreddit, and they'll say like, talk about something creepy that happened to you, and it's full of people telling ghost stories and abduction stories and things like that. And I love reading through them, but Reddit's Reddit, so you got to take it all with a pinch of salt because it might all be BS. But that same thing goes for whatever the source. If we're looking on MUFON and we see these stories, could be BS. They seem to still be happening. The stories are still out there, whether what you're reading is true or not. But also, you would expect that the perpetrators would get better at them over time. So, are they just getting better at making people forget that they happen? Are they taking a different form? We always talk about people bumping into these like Marian apparitions or encountering angels or demons. They count and they happen all over the world. But are they UFO abductions and experiences? That's kind of something that's being discussed in the community. It's a hot topic. But then, as we've said before as well, is it just that they're not bringing people back anymore? Which is kind of a scary implication, right? But we don't hear of massive amount of people going missing. But then on the other side of that coin, we have these really creepy, incredible documentaries like Missing 411 that shows that people are going missing, very often, and they're just the ones we know about. So what is out there that is being misattributed as well? Especially since the phenomena seems to change form and become somewhat reflective as the work of Jack Vallée and Keel, to touch on Keel again, seems to find.
I think speaking to like when I've had like Jay King on and folks from the Experiencer group, and they've got people in contact with them regularly. I have people email me telling me their experiences, and I don't share those on here unless someone said to me, "I'd love you to read this out," and I don't go pursuing that. But I tend to just point them in the direction of groups like the Experiencer group to say, these are the people you're best speaking to, folks that know what you're going through. Thanks for sharing, but I can't help in any way, shape, or form. Other than if you just want someone to tell it to, then that's absolutely fine. I'm not looking to make content out of it. Just if you're just emailing, or I've spoken to one or two listeners before that they just wanted a chat around it and nothing to go out. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. So I think stuff still does definitely happen. I just think it gets lost in the noise of life and media. Do you think maybe folks and people are more, because it's so easy to put something like that out now, where maybe it would have been far more difficult 20 or 30 years ago to get that into the public realm? Like, you could put any story out now about anything and people do. You just have to go on X or Instagram or whatever for 5-10 minutes and you can see all kinds of nonsense. So it just gets lost in the noise. So I don't think that it has gone down. But like you say, that whole speculation point, Dan, I think you addressed it perfectly well about maybe they're not bringing them back. Maybe they're making people forget, they've got better at it. Who knows? Maybe they're powering their spacecraft with the blood of innocents.
Maybe the aliens chucking them a couple of bucks to be like, just keep it on the DL,
Yeah, interesting one. But no, I still think they're going. There's a few more questions, definitely, just on Louis Elizondo's book, Dan. So people still coming in about that. Tim says, I've always had an interest in the phenomenon. It's something that's been a personal passion. I think through years of indoctrination, it's not been easy to share it with people. My family noticed I was reading the Luella Zondo book and I was picking up a confusing and disapproval. Well, looks of confusion and disapproval. How do you guys approach the topic with those close to you? We've touched on this before, so we'll make it quick, Dan. For me, obviously my wife knows what I do with this. My kids are quite into the UFO stuff. They'll go into school, and whenever they've got a kind of religious chat, they're quite happy, especially my little boy who's 8, to tell the teacher all about daddy believing in aliens and not God. And I'm fully behind him to express himself, to say it's far more plausible than what he's been taught in terms of that. But just to be respectful with it. But yeah, I've got no issue chatting to folks about it. I get the skepticism. The stigma is still massive in the UK. And a kind of general public point of view, but I think a lot more folks are willing to talk about it one-on-one. And Dan, same as yourself?
Yeah, by and large, I try not to. It's really overwhelming when you bring up aliens with someone, or just UFOs. It can be really overwhelming. So I tend to keep things I send people short. So like that Daily Show segment was a really good one because it was entertaining. It wasn't just like an information dump. But also wait for questions and listen to someone's opinion on it. It's not up to anyone to convince someone that this is real, aside from, maybe the government or whoever like that. But have the conversation, and some people will open up to you and have some really intriguing experiences or interesting questions that might make you think a little bit differently about this stuff, or that you would have missed if you just, say to them, do you believe in UFOs? And let me tell you about the Wilson document. It gets a lot. You can see people's eyes glaze over. Whereas, hey, have you seen the space station in the sky? That's probably going to lead to a conversation about what else could be up there, or something like that, So just, I would say, be mindful of that eye glaze and giving someone too much with it, and let people have their doubts about it. It's all you can only control what you think. So yeah, just work with that, and don't be too overwhelming for people.
James says, hi gents, one thing I felt missing from interviews with Luella Zondo, and also missing from his book, was any further information about the CRADA agreement with the army for the retrieved samples and testing. Dan, you're better with the details on this than me, but I believe this is the sample that Tom DeLonge and co bought from Linda Moulton Howe.
That's right.
Yeah, they gave over to the army an alleged piece of a UFO, folks, essentially. They gave over to the US Army as part of To the Stars Academy, and it just went away. The last I heard about it, when I spoke to Jim Semivan, was that last year, Dan? Jim Semivan said essentially COVID was a massive part of that it had testing being done on it, but all the labs involved literally were taken away to work on COVID stuff at the time. So it was very much put on the back burner. But that's one of those that you can just see why that just is ripe for conspiracy, isn't it? And I don't mean that necessarily in a bad way, but if you're going to buy a piece of material, alleged UFO material, for what, $25,000-$30,000, something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
And then give it to the army, it's like, come on, like, do you expect to get that back? So yeah, it was just one of those things that's kind of went missing. It wasn't in Lou's book at all anyway, was it, Dan?
So it did go missing. I think you've forgotten. Arrow put up their report about it. Maybe half a year ago.
I didn't mean it did, but I mean, like, why wouldn't you expect it to? Like, if it just went, once it's gone to the 100%. Army, like,
so. Arrow put a report up that they'd studied this thing, that they'd given it to a bunch of labs, that there was nothing anomalous about it. Fine, great. Arrow's put the report up. But like you said, what did they test? This wasn't public testing. People didn't go to watch it and see this stuff. So they could be putting up anything. And this is where I completely agree. It's rife for conspiracy. And it was from the start, because there's never been a chain of custody with this stuff. It was just sent to Art Bell in an envelope with a letter, kind of, saying a story, whether it was real or not. There's no way to tell. But then equally, even if you take it at face value and say, okay, Arrow's report was on the up and up, they did test it, nothing was found. They didn't say what it could be, what it was used for, what the function was. And just like Gary Nolan asserted with all the materials that he's tested, they seem to be purer than what could be produced at the time, and also seem to be something that you wouldn't just put that much money into producing, because they didn't seem to have a use. So where did it come from? You know, even if we take UFOs off the table, what is it? Like, an answer wasn't given. So it leaves this big information gap that people can speculate in. So for me, even though we have a report, there's still really not much more information around it. You know, I could study a little bit of plutonium and tell you the exact chemical composition of it. That's not going to give you a clue as to someone could use it for a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
You know, so the context is important, and so on and so forth. You know, if I pulled a bit of silicon out of the iPhone, it doesn't tell you that it was used in an iPhone. So there's still a lot of question marks about it, even though we do have a lot more information about it, if that was what Arrow tested. So just, clusterfuck.
Peter asks, and it actually mentions Lou's book, but the question's about the program, so one slipped through the net here, Dan. In Imminent, Lou introduced orbs, abductions, and implants as elements of the phenomenon over and above the nuts and bolts of flying saucers and tic-tacs and secretive back engineering programs. It seems as if the disclosure via TTSA, that's To the Stars Academy, and aligned groups is now including these elements. Do you think James Fox will similarly widen the scope of the program to these topics? I wouldn't be shocked if we heard a little bit about stuff like the arcs parts, you know, the little piece of material we just talked about there, because that is a piece of an alleged craft. So maybe that kind of stuff will get in there. I don't think it's going to change the tone or nature of the documentary. No, I think it's very much a documentary set out to drill down into one particularly fascinating aspect of the topic, because I think, for me, I can't say for many because I'd be guessing, but I think for a lot of folks, the back engineering, Dan, and crash retrieval programs is like the holy grail of the topic.
Yeah, I would say so. That's the stuff that you can hold, right?
It's the bodies and the craft,
stories from someone. It's like, this is the tangible stuff. So it's to a lot of people, that stuff would take it beyond reasonable doubt into just, we're in a new age. Whereas, you know, stories about implants don't do much. You know, we have a great documentary, Patient 17, I think it is, Jeremy Corbell. There's a whole bunch of other kind of implant documentaries that really, you know, intriguing stuff, but it doesn't necessarily move the needle. Orbs, I mean, they're included in Arrow's report, so I would say that's intrinsic to whatever the program is that the orbs kind of play into what they're discussing. But yeah, abductions is I'd love to see James Fox takes on abductions, but I can almost imagine him going, where do I even start? And where do you start?
It seems like a different, it's such a subset of this topic, isn't it? And that's how many times, even like today, I've said to you, let's not go into that too much. That's a whole other show, and that's a whole other conversation. You know, you can try and format this kind of stuff, but it can so easily go into all these wild other elements of the conversation that you can struggle to bring it back from at times. And
there are so many facets to that conversation as well. You know, if a abductee tells you one story, and then someone else tells you another story about, you know, who took them and so on and so forth, who's right? You know, if those stories completely contradict each other, you can't put them together in a narrative except to say they experienced something. And I guess that would be interesting if you would see that in, I don't know, a documentary about John Mack, for example, who did look at abductees and kind of say all of these different kind of facets play in. But what I can see is that all of these people have suffered PTSD, and there's definitely an event that's happened to them that is just heavy and shifting, has changed the paradigm. But yeah, he never like pushed that this scenario is right or this scenario is right. And ultimately, if you were to watch a documentary, that's kind of what you're looking for, right? If you didn't get to the end and someone said, okay, so it's the Greys, everybody. The Greys are the people that have been taking them, and they've been pretending to be Nordics or reptilians. It would be really unsatisfying.
And that's my point with this whole topic, Dan, to what I said before. We're chatting about Bob and Lou and Jay Stratton. And if you throw in like a Stephen Greer, a Gary Nolan, a Chris Mellon, a Jacques Vallée, whoever.
Good football team.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, actually. Lacks pace. Tactically would be good. So I think there's a lot. they could. It's unlikely they could all be right, but they could all have elements of their story that could be right.
Yes.
They could all be wrong, but for various reasons that aren't nefarious. You know, just using for example, I think the big one probably when Jay Stratton's book comes out, there's going to be a whole Jay Stratton versus Louis Elizondo narrative for a while that could very quickly go away. It could be very quickly quashed, or it could grow arms and legs. But it doesn't necessarily mean that Louis lied or Jay's lied. There can be other stuff to that where it's actually they're both not lying. It could be something like that, and people will hate that kind of wording, and it's not sticking up for the. I don't know Jay Stratton. I don't know Lou that well. Don't know him as well as you. But, you know, I'm just going off of the very small bits I know of, like a Jay Stratton, where I'm like, well, why would he be lying? Yeah. But that's just the whole topic in a nutshell. You have to pick a side with most of it, don't you? And come down on, is this bullshit or is it worth sticking up for? And
exactly. And that's why I'm always like, you know, when we talk about Bob Lazar, I'm always like, okay, I'm erring on the side of skepticism, but I'm not gonna stop looking at what's presented about his story, because I know that's my bias at play, and I've got to push past that if I want to find the truth as opposed to why I believe. There's a difference in those two things.
You know, one day you could end up with, like, we get full disclosure, and there's Chris Mellon standing next to Bob Lazar going, I'm so relieved I can now finally share what I really think about Bob Lazar's story, because of this and this, no one in the community could come forward and publicly support Bob. But here we are, we can now say what, and that could very well be the case. It might be up there
absolutely.
Ellen Linda Moulton Howe interview, to be fair, but still.
and we always talk about, don't we, that like the history of the subject might be cut off, not because they don't know how to talk about UFOs or they just want to keep the tech to themselves, but maybe because some people did some really dodgy things in the name of research in this kind of area. And War, the book, the Peter Levender book, gets into that a lot, where, you know, these scientists were brought over from Nazi Germany. You know, they were Nazi scientists, and they were given the keys to the kingdom and given carte blanche to do what they wanted. If even one of those people did something that, you know, put someone at risk or put lives in danger, it changes the conversation. You know, imagine if we found out that Robert Bigelow employed a team of men in black that went around throwing experiences into a dungeon. He didn't, just, you know,
movie though. That's like,
that would be right.
Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones back for that one. That sounds fucking great. But still.
Yeah, that would be good. But it just emphasizes the part of, it seems that some people have done some really shitty things in the name of research in this subject, and that is probably why the US government doesn't want to talk about the history of it and wants to hit the reset button and pretend it's being discovered now.
Not unfair. Yeah, not unfair. Very quick one on this, Dan, as we scoot towards the end. It's been almost 2 hours people have had off us, so, you know. A question from Andy. He says, I don't know if you saw what Simon Holland spoke about. He knows someone to do with the James Webb telescope, and they have definitely found something, on another planet, and they are about to disclose something. Also, the supposed object traveling towards us. Thanks. We covered this before, Dan, but for anyone who hadn't heard previous breakdowns, I think it's a rumor that largely gained legs from nothing. And it's not even a rumor that's new. This has been about for a while, that the James Webb is finding stuff, and we're about to get an announcement. Maybe it has, and I am not saying there isn't every chance in the last year or 6 months the James Webb telescope has found evidence of techno or biosignatures on another planet. I don't think it's seen a massive spaceship coming towards us in 4K, personally.
Yeah, and it seems that everyone that has technical knowledge of what the James Webb can do, you know, the design is up there on the internet. You can go look at it. And if that design was in any way wrong, then the payloads would have been different when they were delivering it to space, and they would have needed more fuel and so on and so forth. Like, it changes a lot in the equation. Holland himself is skeptical about this. He entertains a lot of rumors. We saw him do it with the Calvine and the reflecting in the water kind of thing, even when the person that proposed that said, no, it can't be that. Like, you guys are right. Like, the photographic analysis shows that it's wrong. He still kept running with that. I've got to believe he has the best intentions, but yeah, he was skeptical about this rumor. And it just kind of plays out of the woodwork every now and then. The object traveling towards us, I've been kind of, I love space stuff anyway. And there was a paper released about 2 weeks ago about a brown dwarf planet that was speeding through the universe. It wasn't locked into a solar system. It was just like an errant planet, a rogue planet on its own. It's speeding through the universe at million miles an hour. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, wait, is this what people are talking about? And someone that just didn't understand the details of kind of taking object speed in millions of miles an hour through the universe is kind of going, well, it must be a spaceship. There are a whole technical host of reasons why the James Webb wouldn't be able to resolve a spaceship that was the size of New York City or something like that. So yeah, we've just got to keep watching the news, and if they want to share something like that with us, they can. If they don't, they don't. But also, like you said, this rumor's been around for ages. So if it does happen, people who have entertained these rumors aren't proven correct. A broken clock is right twice a day.
Unless it's digital and on 24-hour format.
Just flashing 0000, like reset.
Yeah. James says one aspect of the recent media push that has notably been absent of any information is from the Galileo project. It's been crickets. Have either of you heard how anything is going? I don't have any immediate updates personally, but I know Avi Loeb has literally today been the guest on the Sean Ryan show, and it's like another 3-hour conversation. So I imagine the best place for that would be checking out Sean Ryan's show or any clips from Avi. Dan, I don't know if you know anything on that, but I've not had the chance to listen to that or watch it. It's literally been today it dropped.
I do, but only literally what goes on. That's it. Like they haven't found a spaceship or anything like that. They're still looking at what they dragged off the ocean floor and are looking
it's a time-consuming project. Yeah. That it's not an instant gratification one. That
yeah, exactly, and that's science in a nutshell, right? Just you got to be patient.
S. Nyhart says, have either of you heard of anyone using AI to come up with a pattern or helping to identify some of the UAP and USO sightings? This is something I remember Tom DeLonge talked about a bit, didn't he, back in the day? I think he was talking specifically about using AI to traverse like old religious texts and try and find patterns within those, Dan, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Tom spoke about that. I can't even wrap my head around how you do that to kind of say, look for UFOs. Like you could say for mentions of lights in the kind of fine field and stuff like that.
Yeah.
In terms of applying, AI in the truest sense isn't here. It can't think for itself. It can't come up with new ideas. It's machine learning. So yeah, it's just looking for patterns. Arrow are doing that. They're applying that to the databases. China said they were doing that. I know the SCU are doing that. I have no doubt the Galileo are doing that with the stuff that they found. It seems to just be part and parcel of everything these days.
Absolutely. And Dan had one final one to go off of, and this was a little bit of a brain dump. So listener Liam wrote in with this one. So I was listening to your Darcy Weir interview and had a brain fart I'd like to share with you. And don't worry, I won't do this on a regular basis. I mean, I might want you to, I might not, depending on how well this goes, Liam. If you like the concept, then please use it for yourself or to ask someone much.
You heard it, Liam. Liam Andy wants you to send him his farts.
Yeah, send me your brain farts on a regular basis. If you like the concept, please use it for yourself to ask someone much smarter than me the question. I'll ask Dan. I was thinking that we always talk about UFOs in human terms, like it went into the ocean and had no resistance, or it just went straight through the mountain, or how can it possibly go that fast in water or air? But my brain fart was, what if the ocean wasn't an ocean to them? What if that mountain the UFO went through was not a mountain for them also? They enter our reality and do crazy things. But what if it's our reality that is changing? Maybe there's a superimposed reality onto ours that we can glimpse every now and then. They ignore our rules because they are not really here in the first place. And maybe a few can come right into our reality to do stuff and leave. When I had this thought, I also speculated that for all we know, they might not only be here already in another reality onto ours, but also might live their life in fast forward, so to speak. Maybe they really need to slow down or push the slow-mo button to come in. Maybe also, if we are reverse engineering anything, it's actually to be able to get into their reality, rather than drive a UFO to the Pleiades to meet the Nordics. Lol. And that's what he said. It's fun to speculate, and one thing for sure is that we need to stop putting our human framework onto this subject, as I believe it's far beyond any human comprehension and possibly a lot weirder than we all think. This theory doesn't answer a lot of things, but had to share. Go well. I like that, Liam. And can I just ask folks, if you've got any of those kind of brain farts, as he calls it, send me them in, because I quite like the discussion ideas on those. So any kind of random dumps of stuff, don't even worry about formatting it. Just hoy it down like Liam did there. No regard for me having to read it out whatsoever. Emojis and all, no grammar, and let me read it out. Just joking, Liam. But yeah, send stuff in like that, folks. I like that. But Dan, thoughts on that kind of thinking?
I love that, and we need more
I
of
knew
it.
you would.
Yeah, it's. I mean, yeah, he's absolutely right. We think still in human terms. Even the idea of ET is so entrenched in our modern day thinking, and we need to get away from it because the evidence doesn't back it up. You know, when you go into Valet's work and he talks about theories, and this comes up a lot. When you look at the data, theories make more sense than ET does. And that's not to say that fairies are real. It's just to say that it doesn't fit if it's ET. So there's more of a novel kind of explanation here. And the physics that we know are from our perspective. You know, even when we talk about time and relativity and special relativity and what Einstein found out, it's all from our perspective with these meat suits that we have. And that's all we have. When we look out into the universe, there's dark matter. And dark matter is just a placeholder name for stuff that we don't know what it is, and it makes up most of the universe.
Yeah.
There could be a whole host of life in there. There's research being done about dark photons that essentially just the opposite of our photons, and they're trying to come up with experiments to see how these things work, because we can't see them naturally. And the James Webb Telescope is a really good example of, you know, it looks out into the universe and it sees in the near infrared spectrum, and it sees things that we just cannot see with our eyes. Wi-Fi is always one. I think Lou talks about this, and we have as well, you know, radio waves and Wi-Fi and stuff like that. Just because our phones are off, it doesn't mean that the Wi-Fi isn't there. But we don't think of Wi-Fi signals as in a, you know, is the Wi-Fi in the room with you right now, like ghosts?
Yeah.
We know it's there. We're comfortable with it being invisible. So we need to kind of flip the script on it. And Liam did that there a little bit, you know, talking about our oceans. What if the life form that we're encountering sees space as its land and we're in the sky to it?
Yeah.
It becomes like an inverted kind of equation then, doesn't it? If we're thinking like, oh, we need pressure vessels to go into these areas, it's going to find, you know, it easier to be in vacuum than we do. So we need to flip it all. And when I was talking to Peter Lavender on the Psychoactive podcast about a week and a half ago now, we got talking about time and viruses and things like that. And we were trying to get outside of that box, and it starts to hurt your brain after a little bit. But this is precisely why I love sci-fi, because it gets into these areas and the authors do their research and they try and figure it out. And yeah, like a virus, if it occupies us, you know, a virus is really small. So its world is tiny to us, but to it is massive. And then when it occupies us and it kind of starts to maybe see our senses and how we experience the universe, does it see us as a window into a different dimension, so to speak, or humans as a vehicle to get it into some place? And I love that little thing that Liam threw in there about, well, what if they move really fast and they've got to slow themselves down to be able to see us? And that's great, because nature comes up with all these novel kind of solutions to living and things like that, and to just surviving. And there's nothing saying that it couldn't have made something that lives faster than us. You know, whales seem to live slower. They move slower. They're kind of bigger, and their biology is set to play about in a world that we're really not comfortable with. So the whales are kind of the opposite to that, right? They don't necessarily have to slow themselves down to see us, but they live in complete darkness and they don't see us until we shine a light at them. And that culture is so old and they live for so long that you got to wonder, how did they see us when we encounter them? You know, when you leave your house, does your dog think you're gone for 20 years? Is that what it feels like to them? And that's why they're so happy when you get home? We have no way of knowing how another creature or being experiences time. And time is something that we hear again and again and again, from, you know, people like Tom DeLonge and Lou Elizondo and stuff like that. If it turns out that everything that we know as the, what is it, like 14.2 billion years, I think I'm getting that wrong, but you know, the age of the universe, if it turns out that from something else's perspective that's a microsecond,
Yeah.
then it changes, and it changes the conversation, and the implications are kind of heavier for humanity, right? And you can only think so far with it, because literally our biology isn't set to think that way. So yeah, thank you, Liam. I really enjoyed that question and being able to spout off a bit. And just to recommend as well, if Liam wants to kind of get into more of this kind of speculation and thinking, I'd recommend he pick up a book called Children of Time, which kind of runs with it in a few facets. The first book is from a spider's point of view, evolving to like a civilization. The second one is octopus, and the third one seems to be like a raven type life form, like a crow or something like that. And yeah, it kind of gets into how they experience the world and what the world would be like to them, even down to the point where you know, there's no winners and losers from some of these creatures' points of view. There's just tools and things that they can use, and they don't like to declare victory after a war or something like that, which is something that we take for granted, right?
That sounds wonderfully pretentious, Dan, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Imagine being that author pitching that to your publisher one day. I'm going to write this book from the point of view of a spider, seeing civilization, you know, fall and rise and collapse, all in a day's weaving of the web. But yeah, no, I appreciate that. And do you know what? After 2 hours, it's a long conversation to go into, but I think it gets into that kind of UFO philosophy type. You know, you start to just go on all kind of weird and wonderful. I've actually got Stephen Brown coming back on Wednesday, and we're not talking Nazca mummies, but Stephen Brown, obviously involved in the topic through that lens, was involved at the Yale teach-in at the university last week, and those videos aren't available online yet. But he's coming on to talk about that, going to Yale, talking UFOs, and he's talking about kind of aliens, benevolence, all that kind of stuff. So any kind of philosophy type questions, that kind of stuff is ideal for, because Stephen's quite happy to sit and think, you know, what if? And we've often spoke, Dan, about, and I've said a few times recently, I imagine the idea that it gets a bit quantum leapy in my head, where you've got like Al in Quantum Leap was in this chamber and he was going into a different reality, and only one person there could see him. What if some of these UFOs, not all, but some of them, are literally another species in a different dimensions way of coming into our reality, that they perhaps couldn't even leave the craft because they're not even here? That craft is just a projection from somewhere else. And that's not to say there aren't other species here or via drones or coming from different planets, but just one of those kind of lines off the spider diagram to explain something really, really fucking strange and weird that kind of would make sense but not make sense.
Yeah, and that's exactly how we need to think, right? Like 100 years ago, everything in the universe was molecules and solids and objects, and now we're into a universe where everything is probabilistic, and it's there and both not there. And if that's hard to get your head around, that's completely fine, because it's not intuitive to us as material people. And so we need to incorporate that kind of thinking into the UFO conversation. And yeah, really excited to hear what Stephen has to say.
That might be why, though, Dan, we wouldn't be good representatives. Can imagine like the aliens came down one day and we were like, so is this what it is? And we gave them all these weird ideas and they went, oh God, no, we're just from Mars. Like literally that's it. We built why the fuck would you think that we're from a different dimension? Like, do you not see the craft we've been leaving you? And we're like, oh, we thought, no, God, no, we're just from along the road. Jesus Christ. Like, yeah, people like, so.
And that's why we all need to be okay with being wrong in this subject.
Yeah. You can either be wrong or you can be Keanu Reeves. And Dan, on that, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. And yeah, just a quick reminder to people, donate to the efforts to help the victims of the hurricanes. They need you right now.
I'll put the link in the chat for that, Dan. And thank you very much for everyone listening. And we'll be back very, very soon. that is all for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. Apple and Spotify do make a huge difference to the algorithm. If you're checking the show out on YouTube, please don't forget to like and leave a comment on here as well. Any sharing you do is very much appreciated on any social media platform. And finally, you can listen to shows ad-free and sponsor-free in their glorious full versions by subscribing for less than the price of a coffee on Apple, Spotify, just search That UFO Podcast Premium. YouTube, you can sign up and be a member, or you can do that through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, folks.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and